The ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday. Not that the Volcae Empire knew what a Tuesday was. They transmitted their demand across 17 frequencies simultaneously in 42 languages, because that was how they had always done it. 47 civilizations had received the same message. 47 civilizations had responded with fear, with tears, with immediate submission. The message was simple: surrender within 60 cycles or be destroyed. Earth read it on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday they had sent their response. Not a surrender, not a plea, a personnel manifest. Grand Admiral Dravos received the file aboard his command station above the conquered world of Varith IV. He was a tall creature, even by Volcae standards, 3 meters of gray armored muscle, 4 eyes that could track movement in total darkness, a military record that spanned 200 years of unbroken conquest. He had never lost a war. He did not know how losing felt. He opened the human file expecting diplomats, politicians, scientists maybe. What he found was a list of names, ranks, and biological designations. 12 individuals selected as the advanced delegation. Attached to each name was a species note, written in plain language, as if the humans had simply forgotten that the note would be read by the people they were sending it to. The notes read: predator class, high-gravity origin, sustained hypoxic tolerance, tissue regeneration above standard, psychological profile under threat, focused, aggressive, tactically adaptive. Dravos read the file twice. Then he called his chief xenobiologist, a quiet researcher named Soreth, and asked what she made of it. Soreth read it once and said, "They are telling us what they are. I do not think they realize we do not believe them." Dravos dismissed her. He had 200 warships in formation outside the station. He had conquered species that could survive vacuum exposure. He was not afraid of 12 creatures from a small planet on the outer edge of mapped space. The shuttle arrived 6 hours later. His honor guard was assembled in the docking bay, 8 soldiers, each one selected for size and presence, armor polished, weapons visible. The standard display. Every delegation that had ever walked into this bay had stopped at the sight of them. Some had wept. One had fainted. The 12 humans walked off the shuttle and did not stop. They did not slow down. They did not look at the guards with fear or awe. They looked at them the way someone looks at furniture, noted, cataloged, dismissed as non-threatening. Every human head moved in the same way within the first 3 seconds. Eyes sweeping the room, tracking exits, measuring distances, reading the guards' positions and weapon placements in a single practiced motion, so automatic it did not even look like thinking. It looked like breathing. The Volcae guards, trained to read body language across 40 species, felt something they had no word for. Not fear. Not quite. Something older. The specific discomfort of a large animal that has just realized the smaller animal in the room is not behaving like prey. The lead human walked ahead of the others. Her name, according to the manifest, was Rhea. She was unremarkable by any physical measurement, shorter than every Volcae in the room, no visible armor, no weapons. She had dark eyes that moved with the same quiet efficiency as the rest of her group, and she walked like she had already decided what she would do if everything went wrong. She stopped in front of Dravos, looked up at him without tilting her head back very far, because she had already calculated the angle. Dravos spoke first, as was his right as the one who had issued the ultimatum. He told her that Earth had 60 cycles to submit. That resistance was impossible. That every species that had tried to resist was now part of the Dominion, reduced and obedient, and that humanity's survival depended entirely on the cooperation shown in the next few minutes. He had given versions of this speech 47 times. It always worked. Rhea let him finish. She did not fidget. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. "We came without weapons as your terms required," she said. But understand that the 12 people behind me were not selected because they are our diplomats. They were selected because they are the 12 people we trust most to stay calm in a room full of people who might want to hurt them. That is a different qualification. Dravo stared at her. None of the 47 civilizations had said anything like that. Behind Rhea, the 11 others stood in loose formation. Not rigid, not aggressive, relaxed in the specific way that very dangerous things are relaxed because they do not need to be tense. One of Dravos's guards shifted his weight. A human near the back of the group noticed and tracked the movement with his eyes, just for a moment, then looked away. The guard noticed being noticed. He did not move again. Dravos pulled his attention back to Rhea. He was 400 years old. He had looked into the eyes of creatures that could tear soldiers apart with their hands. He was not easily unsettled. He was unsettled. "You have a great deal of confidence," he said, "for a species that has never fought a war beyond its own system." Rhea looked at him with something that was almost patience. "We have never fought beyond our own system," she agreed. "But we have been fighting wars since we existed. Every war we ever fought, we fought against something trying to kill us. Every war we ever fought, we survived." She let that sit. "You have no idea what you just asked us to send." The dust on Callow's moon had never been disturbed before humans arrived. It was a thin layer of gray powder over frozen rock, undisturbed for centuries because nothing lived there, nothing moved there, and the Dominion had never considered it worth stationing troops on a moon with no atmosphere and no resources. It was empty. It was worthless. That was exactly why the humans chose it. They had been there for 19 days before the Dominion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel above them. 19 days of moving in vacuum suits, carving positions into the rock by hand, running power lines through cracks in the surface, building something that from orbit looked like nothing at all. The Dominion fleet numbered 60 warships, standard punitive deployment. Against an uncontacted species with no confirmed military capability, 60 ships was more than enough. It was a show of force, the kind designed to make a species understand, in one clear moment, that resistance was not a concept that applied to them. The fleet's lead commander, an officer named Gret, took one sweep of his long-range sensors before ordering the descent formation. The moon read as empty. A few heat signatures, probably equipment, probably already abandoned. He had expected to find humans cowering behind a communications relay, begging for terms. He saw nothing that alarmed him. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was entering the debris field on the moon's trailing edge without slowing down. The debris field had been there for geological time, fragments of a shattered microasteroid, spread across a wide orbital band, too thin and scattered for his sensors to flag as dangerous. What his sensors did not flag was that 17 of those fragments were no longer natural. Humans had spent 19 days attaching things to them. Small things, quiet things that had been powered off until 60 Dominion warships flew between them. 11 ships were destroyed in the first 4 seconds. Gret did not understand what had happened. His damage reports were contradictory. He ordered a halt and a full sensor sweep, and while he was doing that, the humans on the moon's surface began firing from below. They had no warships. They had portable rail launchers that had been assembled in pieces and carried in on their backs. The weapons looked like nothing in any Dominion catalog. Improvised, angular, clearly built from components designed for something else entirely. They fired in irregular bursts that were hard to predict and harder to target, because the humans behind them kept moving, kept changing position, never staying in one place long enough for a targeting lock. 2 more ships went down. Gret pulled the fleet up and ordered a direct bombardment of the surface. Standard response to ground-based resistance. Overwhelming firepower, area denial, eliminate the threat from range. The bombardment hit rock. The humans had gone underground, not into prepared bunkers, but into the natural cracks and tunnels of the moon's crust that they had mapped during those 19 days. They went deep and they went fast. And the bombardment turned the surface into a slag field, while humans sat 12 meters below it and waited. Then they came back up. Gret lost 4 more ships before he ordered a full retreat. In total, 15 vessels destroyed, 9 damaged, retreat executed in under 40 minutes. Against 300 humans with no ships, no air support, and no supply line. The after-action report took him 6 hours to write because he kept stopping. He did not know how to describe what had happened in language his superiors would understand. The tactical language of the Dominion was built on certain assumptions, that the species being engaged would respond predictably to overwhelming force, that superior numbers would produce proportional advantage, that fear was a military constant that could be leveraged. The humans had not been afraid. He had watched sensor footage of individual humans being knocked off their feet by near impacts, getting up, and continuing. Watched them move through a bombardment zone to recover equipment. Watched one small unit get cut off from the main group, outnumbered 8-1 by the Dominion infantry that had been dropped to the surface, and fight for 11 minutes until support arrived, not desperately, but methodically, as if being outnumbered 8-1 was an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. One line in the report gave Grand Admiral Dravos the most trouble when he read it later. Gret had written, "I ordered the surface bombardment expecting the humans to remain underground for the duration. Instead, they waited until the bombardment pattern became predictable, which took approximately 3 minutes, and began moving through it to new positions. They were using our own fire to cover their movement. I do not believe they were trained to do this. I believe they simply noticed it was possible." Dravos read the report twice. Then he called the officer who had dismissed Sorath's biological analysis and asked him to explain how 300 creatures with improvised weapons had destroyed 15 warships. The officer had no answer. On the occupied world of Varith IV, light years away, an old Varith elder sat in a room with no windows and watched the battle footage on a screen small enough to hide under a floor panel. The footage was blurry and incomplete. A signal fragment pulled from Dominion military channels by a resistance contact who had no idea what they were passing along. The elder had not cried in 30 years. The Dominion had taken that from him slowly, the way it took everything, gradually, until one day you looked back and realized the person you used to be was gone. He watched 300 humans refuse to die on a worthless moon. His eyes went wet. He did not bother wiping them. Sorath had a habit of talking to her data. Not out loud, not where anyone could hear, just a quiet internal narration that helped her think when the numbers stopped making sense. She had been doing it for 30 years of xenobiological research, and in 30 years, the data had never not made sense. Every species she had studied followed the same basic rules. Intelligence emerged as a survival response to environmental pressure. The smarter the species, the more it had evolved away from physical danger, using tools, building shelter, removing itself from the food chain so that the brain could do the work the body no longer needed to. Humans did not follow this rule. She had been studying them in secret for weeks, pulling every sensor record and captured observation from the Callow's engagement and every contact before it. She had biological samples from the diplomatic visit, air from the docking bay, shed skin cells from the floor, nothing invasive, nothing the humans had noticed. She had their movement data, their reaction times, their biometric profiles recorded without their knowledge by the station's environmental sensors. She spread it all out and looked at it for a long time. The first thing she noticed was the gravity data. Earth's surface gravity was higher than that of any spacefaring species in the Dominion by a significant margin. Every Dominion species had evolved on worlds close to a standard baseline. Humans had evolved on a world that was actively trying to crush them, and their skeletal density, muscle fiber composition, and cardiovascular capacity reflected it. They were, pound for pound, the most physically robust sapient species she had ever recorded. The second thing she noticed was the stress hormone data. In every other species Sareth had studied, the physiological stress response, the chemical cascade triggered by danger, produced a predictable curve. Hormone levels spiked, cognitive function narrowed, fine motor control degraded. The body committed to immediate survival at the cost of complex thought. It was a deep evolutionary compromise. You could not think clearly and fight for your life at the same time. Human data showed a different curve entirely. Under acute threat, human stress hormones spiked in the same initial burst, but then something else happened. A secondary system activated, one that did not suppress the first but ran alongside it, producing a state that had no equivalent in Dominion biology. Heart rate elevated but controlled. Cognitive function did not narrow, it sharpened. Fine motor control did not degrade. In some individuals it improved. She checked her instruments 3 times. The data was consistent. Humans under mortal threat did not become simpler. They became more capable, more focused, as if some ancient layer of their brain, built in a time when their planet was full of things that wanted to eat them, activated and pushed everything else aside, not panic, not shutdown, but a cold and absolute clarity that their biology had spent millions of years perfecting. She marked this section of her report in red. Then she kept reading her own data and found the part that was worse. Humans habituated to threat exposure faster than any species on record. The first time they encountered a new danger, their stress response peaked high. The second time it peaked lower. By the 5th or 6th exposure, the peak was almost flat. They were not becoming numb. Their performance data showed they were still fully engaged. They were simply filing the danger away, categorizing it, treating something that would have incapacitated another species as background information. In the battle data from Callow, she found an exchange between 2 humans recorded by a sensor drone that had drifted close enough to pick up their suit communications. They were pinned down by orbital fire. One said to the other, "Left side is better cover." The other said, "Got it." That was the entire exchange. No panic, no prayer, no recognition that they were in a situation that should have killed them. Just, "Left side is better cover." Soreth finished her analysis and sat with it for a while. Then she wrote her report, marked it with the highest classification rating the Dominion Research Division had, and sent it directly to the War Council with a personal note attached. The note said, in plain language, "We are not fighting a primitive species that has gotten lucky. We are fighting the apex predator of a death world that spent its entire evolutionary history in a state of total competition. Every other sapient species in this dominion evolved intelligence as a way to avoid danger. Humans evolved intelligence in addition to every other survival advantage they had already developed. They are not more dangerous than our soldiers because they are better trained. They are more dangerous because they are more fully what they are." She added one final line. "I recommend we do not send more ships." The War Council received her report. 3 members read the summary. 1 read the full document. That one requested a meeting to discuss it, which was scheduled for 40 days' time. In the meantime, the Council voted to double the assault fleet and send 600 warships to the Sol frontier. Sareth learned about the vote through a routine budget notification. She did not talk to her data that evening. She sat in her lab and looked at the wall and thought about the Callow's footage. 300 humans on a worthless moon, turning a bombardment into a maneuver, refusing the conclusion that they should be dead. She thought, they are going to send more ships. She thought, the humans are going to be ready. She turned off her light and went home, and for the first time in 30 years of research, she hoped she was wrong about something. She did not think she was. It started with a cargo manifest. A Dominion supply hauler running the Varith to Kethara route carried, among other things, a crate of processed grain, a replacement hydraulic assembly for a mining drill, and a data chip tucked inside the lining of a work jacket belonging to a dockworker named Ossel who had no military training and no resistance affiliation, and who had simply copied a file he was not supposed to have seen. The file was a section of a Dominion fleet communication log. It contained, buried in the routing data, a summary of the Callow's engagement. Ossel did not know what to do with it. He passed it to a woman who moved freight on the Vareth surface, who passed it to a man who repaired atmospheric processors in the lower colony levels, who passed it to the elder who had no name in any official record, and who had been coordinating resistance cells in silence for 11 years. The elder read the summary 3 times. Then he began copying it. Within 40 days, a version of the Callow's data existed on 14 occupied worlds. It had been changed in the copying, details added, details lost, some pieces purely rumor by the time they arrived. But the core of it remained. Earth had been attacked. Earth had not fallen. Earth had destroyed 15 Dominion warships with 300 soldiers and no ships of their own, on a moon with no atmosphere, using weapons they had built themselves. The details spread faster than the Dominion could track. Subject species had been communicating in the gaps of their surveillance for decades, in code words embedded in trade requests, in the rhythm of standard maintenance reports, in the physical passing of objects between workers who never made eye contact. The Dominion had never fully cracked these networks because the Dominion had never fully believed they existed. Conquered species were supposed to be broken. Broken things did not organize. The Dominion had been wrong about that for a long time. On a gas processing platform above the world of Deathorak, a Gorathi foreman named Steg received a 2-sentence message embedded in a routine equipment order. He read it twice. Then he walked to the window of his control room and looked out at the gas giant below, which his species had been forced to mine for 60 years, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He called it possibility. It was not hope yet. Hope required more than one battle. But possibility, the bare, basic acknowledgement that the current order of things was not permanent and fixed, that was a thing he had not let himself feel since the first year of occupation, when feeling it had hurt too much. He kept the message. He passed it along. At the Dominion's Central Command Station, Grand Admiral Dravos was dealing with a different problem. His garrison commanders across the Empire were sending him requests for reinforcement. Not because of direct threats, no occupied world had risen openly, but the commanders could feel something changing. Minor defiances, slower compliance, workers who had always arrived on time arriving 4 minutes late, looks held a second longer than they should be. Small things, meaningless things individually. Together, they added up to something a 400-year military career, recognized even when it could not be quantified. The atmosphere was shifting. Dravos could not send reinforcements everywhere. His fleet resources were committed to the Sol front, where 600 ships had been deployed and were not, according to the latest reports, producing the expected result. The humans had withdrawn from the Callow's moon, but they had not surrendered, and the fleet had not been able to locate their main force or establish control over the outer Sol territories. The humans were not where they were supposed to be. They were not behaving the way an outgunned species should behave. They were moving in ways that suggested they understood the Dominion's tactical doctrine, understood it well enough to avoid being caught by it. This bothered Dravos in a way he could not fully explain. He called for Rhea. She arrived at his office under escort, calm as always. He offered her something to sit on because he had learned that she would stand if he did not. She sat. He sat across from her. "Tell me how this ends," he said. He had not meant to say it that way. It came out without the formality he had intended. Rhea looked at him for a moment. "That depends on you," she said. "Your fleet is larger than ours. Your technology is ahead of ours in several areas. I will not pretend otherwise." She folded her hands in her lap. But you are fighting us in places where your advantages matter less. In the gap between what your fleet can do and what your fleet can see, we are doing the things we are good at. We will keep doing them. Dravos said, "We can destroy your worlds." "Yes," Rhea said, "you can. And if you do, you will have to hold every planet in this empire with your full military force for the next 200 years because every occupied species watching you right now will understand what you are. Not conquerors, not administrators, something that burns worlds because it is losing." She paused. "We have a word for that." "What word?" "Cornered," she said. Dravos was quiet. Outside, light years away, Ossel the dockworker was eating his lunch and thinking about nothing in particular. Somewhere in the dark between stars, his small file was still moving, still copying, still passing from hand to hand through networks the Dominion insisted did not exist. The word was spreading. Earth had not fallen. The weapon had a name in Dominion military records, Orbital Denial System, Class 7. But the engineers who built it had always called it something simpler, the answer. As in, the answer to a population that would not cooperate, the answer to a resistance that would not collapse, the answer to the specific problem of a species that kept refusing to understand what it was supposed to do when a superior force told it to stop. It fired once, at a human colony called Harrow Station. 12,000 people. A mining and research settlement on a rock 3 times smaller than Earth's moon. No military significance. Chosen specifically because it had no military significance. Because the point was not strategy, it was message. The War Council had argued about it for 6 hours and then voted 7-2, and the weapon had fired, and Harrow Station had stopped existing in 40 seconds. Then they waited for humanity's response. For 6 hours there was nothing. No transmission, no demand for negotiation, no grief broadcast on open channels, no ultimatum. The Dominion monitoring stations on the Sol frontier watched and recorded and sent their feeds back to the War Council, and the War Council watched and nothing happened. One junior counselor said that maybe the humans were paralyzed, stunned into inaction, that this was what breaking a species looked like, this silence. An older counselor who had been part of 23 conquests said nothing, because something felt wrong, and she had learned to pay attention to things that felt wrong. 6 hours after Harrow Station, every human-controlled front in the known engagement zone activated simultaneously. Not in the places the Dominion expected. Not at the front lines where the 600 ships were sitting in formation, waiting for a direct engagement. The attacks came at fuel depots and communication relays, and the 3 repair stations the fleet depended on for sustained operations, all of which were behind the line, all of which had been mapped and targeted with a precision that meant humanity had known about them for some time and had simply been waiting. 14 installations were destroyed or disabled in the first 2 hours. The Dominion fleet, 600 warships, found itself operating in a zone where its supply chain was suddenly compromised, and its communication with command had a 14-minute delay, and the humans it had been trying to catch were no longer running. They were pushing. A Dominion fleet captain named Dale, who had been in position above the reach belt for 3 weeks waiting for engagement orders, recorded in his personal log, "I have fought 6 wars. I know what a retreating enemy looks like. I know what a holding action looks like. I do not know what this is. They are not attacking our fleet directly. They are attacking the things our fleet needs to exist. Every engagement is fast. By the time I can redirect response assets, they are already somewhere else. They seem to have anticipated every response pattern I have tried." He added a day later, "I think they memorized our tactical doctrine. I think they have known our doctrine for a while. I think the 3 weeks we spent in holding formation while they refused to engage was not a sign that they were afraid. I think they were watching us." On Cathara, Sareth received a copy of the new battle data and did not read it immediately. She already knew what it would say. She had written her report 2 months ago. She had said, "They learn, they adapt. They do not need to match you in resources if they can match you in information." No one had listened. She read the data anyway because she was a scientist, and she found one new thing. In the capture logs from a disabled Dominion sensor post, there was a partial recording of a two-human team that had been sent to destroy the post manually, presumably because a remote signal attack would have triggered an alarm. The recording was 17 seconds long. The two humans moved through the corridor with no wasted motion, no visible communication, no audible coordination. They did not need to talk because they already knew what the other person would do. They had been fighting together long enough that they had become, in some functional sense, a single system. Soreth stared at that footage for a long time. Meanwhile, in the Dominion Senate, a senator named Vale was reading her full report. He had finally gotten access to it through a contact on the War Council, and he had read every page. And now he sat in his office on a chair designed for a body shaped differently than his own. Because his species had been conquered 40 years ago and had never had Senate representation until 15 years ago, and the furniture had never been updated, and he thought about what he had read. His species was called the Sorathi. They had been miners once on their own world before the Dominion came. Now they were still miners on many worlds but for someone else. He pulled up a private communication channel and sent a short message to 3 other occupied species delegates in the Senate. It contained 4 words and a file attachment. The 4 words were, "Read this, then respond." The file was Soreth's report. All 3 delegates responded within a day. All 3 said the same thing in different words. They were ready. Outside, the Dominion was not collapsing. It was too large, too old, too entrenched to collapse quickly. But something had changed in the structure of it, a vibration in the deep machinery that had not been there before. The kind of vibration that starts small. The kind that grows. The ceasefire was signed on a human ship. Not because it was neutral ground. Because Dravos had requested it, and Rhea had agreed, and neither of them was willing to pretend this was anything other than what it was. A negotiation between a power that had run out of workable options and a species that had paid more than it ever wanted to in order to produce that result. The ship was called the Resolute. It was a supply vessel, not a warship, old, functional, marked with the kind of small damage that accumulates during years of active use. Dravos had expected something larger, something ceremonial. The humans did not do ceremony for this. Ceremony was for victories that felt clean. This did not feel clean. He had lost 412 ships over the course of the war, not to superior numbers or superior technology, but to inferior numbers that refused to behave inferiorly. Humans who hit supply chains instead of front lines. Humans who withdrew when pressure increased and returned when pressure decreased, perfectly timed, never where the fleet expected them. Humans who fought like they were playing a game they had spent their whole lives studying, because they had. He looked older than he had at the start of this, though 400 years of command had given him a face that did not change much. Rhea looked older too. She had buried 26 people she knew by name. She did not list them in her opening statement. She did not use them as a rhetorical point. She mentioned them once, quietly, at the beginning of the first session, said that she wanted the record to contain their names, and then she read the names aloud into the official archive, and then she moved on to the terms. The terms were not what the Dominion would have written. Earth was recognized as a sovereign power, not a client state, not a protected territory, sovereign. The occupied frontier worlds where humans had fought were listed as contested zones with guaranteed civilian protections. The subject species within the Dominion, 14 groups represented by Senator Vale's quietly assembled coalition, received a formal review process for autonomy claims that the Dominion had refused to consider for decades. Dravos accepted the terms, not all of them without modification. The final document was compromised on both sides, as final documents always are, but its shape was closer to Rhea's list than to anything the Dominion had ever yielded before. Afterwards, when the formal session was closed, Dravo stayed in the room. Rhea stayed too. They were not friends. They were not enemies in the clean way that the word implies. They were two people who had sat across from each other for months while the war happened around them, and they had developed the specific kind of understanding that comes from watching someone do a difficult thing without flinching. Dravo said, "I need to understand something." Rhea waited. "Harrow Station," he said. "We destroyed it, and instead of stopping, you accelerated. I have fought wars where destroying a civilian population broke the enemy's will entirely. It has always worked." Rhea was quiet for a moment. "When we were still an early civilization," she said, "we had wars on our own planet, many wars, small ones and very large ones. The very large ones, the ones that nearly ended everything, taught us something about what happens to a population when it loses people it loves to an enemy that chose to target them." She looked at him steadily. "It does not make them want to stop. It makes them want to make sure the thing that did it can never do it again." Dravo said nothing. "You weaponized our grief," she said, "and our grief is not a weakness." He sat with that. He did not have an answer for it. He had spent 400 years studying war, and he had not known that. His civilization had never needed to know it because the species they had conquered had broken instead of hardened. Different natures, different histories. He looked at her and said, honestly, "I did not expect you." "No one ever does," she said. On Varith IV, the day the ceasefire terms were announced, the elder whose name existed only in resistance records walked out of the building where he had lived for 11 years without standing in public. He stood in the open air, cool, thin, filtered through a processor the Dominion had installed 30 years ago, and he stayed there for a long time. He was not celebrating. He did not know yet what the terms would mean in practice, whether the review process would produce anything real, whether autonomy was a word with weight or a word designed to sound like weight. He had lived too long under the Dominion to trust easily. But he was standing outside. That was new, that was something. In the Dominion's central archive, a bureaucrat with no knowledge of the larger events updated the Sol Systems classification file as directed. The old label had read, "Pre-integration contact, expected compliant." A note had been added partway through the war, "Resistance active, escalation pending." The new label read simply, "Sovereign class unresolved." Below it, in smaller text, a secondary flag that was applied to fewer than 12 entries in 400 years of Dominion military records. "Do not engage without full council authorization." The bureaucrat filed it without reading it closely. It was just a classification update, just data. Somewhere in the dark between stars, on 14 worlds, in shipping manifests and atmospheric processor logs, and the rhythm of footsteps in corridors without cameras, the word moved. Not that Earth had won. That Earth had not broken. In the end, that was the part that mattered most.